Hello, everybody. Wow. We are live. We're here aboard Old Mighty Sparrow here. Wow, this is so crazy to be back on land. I've been back for a few days now and to I'm still every once in a while I'm down below on this boat and I feel like I get bumped over and I know that I'm in one of the calmest marinas you could ever ask for and I'm still a little bit land sick, which is pretty crazy. But yeah, so tonight I figured I would like to just get down and if somebody can give me like a thumbs up or let me know that the audio is working, because I don't really have much a huge amount of experience when it comes to this stuff. But I always want to make sure that everything you guys can hear me and all that sort of stuff. I'm pretty sure the chat and everything is all up and running. All right, good. Thank you, Brian. I appreciate it. Brian, you are literally just a few boats down the way here at Ladies Island Marina. So I don't know why you're not over here just sitting with me. But in any event, I figured I would just open this up sort of as a public forum, to let people ask any questions they want about the voyage. I definitely want to say a big thanks to everybody, not only for all the sort of support that I've received since I've returned to land, but also the amount of crazy support I got before I left for the trip. I mean, there were people throwing me a little bit of money here and there for extra food and stock the bar and all that sort of stuff. And that all came was a wild trip. I was adding up the miles tonight, and it was just under 2,300 miles to get from Maine, pretty much going around Bermuda and then coming back to South Carolina. And it took 25 days. It seemed like it was either blowing like crazy and rough seas, or I was becalmed and fighting the lightest winds that the ocean could provide. And, the slop and chop of the waves after a storm seemed to subside very quickly. And then I would be on a flat, placid ocean, kind of in what I like to be in. And then without more than a day or two, it would just be absolutely insane. Oh, Rob's in the house. Hey, Rob, how's it going? Rob's been helping me quite a bit. I had a chat with him because he has some experience dealing with people with PTSD and stuff, and I was definitely a little bit on the edge, you could say, as far as mentally. Sort of not only while I was out there on the ocean, but also, you get back to land and I don't think that term shell shocked is really appropriate, but it's one of those things where you go through an experience like that, and out at sea, you're still up against all these things and trying to get back, and there's a lot of stuff that you have to focus on. But then once you tie off to the dock, the reality of all the things that happen to you sort of start to seep in slowly. I've never had an experience where I have had such horrible land sickness as when I returned to land this time. I think it was a mixture of the exhaustion and the stress of the past few weeks, and that, as well as being shaken up like a rag doll out there for weeks on end. But essentially, the earth felt like it was a sponge, and I literally couldn't barely walk in a straight line for a number of days. And usually it's a night, or you get in the shower and you're boxed in, there's no horizon, and you sort of are wobbling around. But this time was pretty serious. I was a little bit worried for a while that if this sticks around, I'm going to be in some serious trouble. I'm going to need like a cane or a walking stick or something. So the boat looks good, thank you. It's coming along. I still have a few things to inspect. uh I've only found two cracked bulkheads, which is very good. I thought for a little while that essentially the inside of the boat had cracked completely free of the actual hull, but I think we might be looking kind of okay. I mean, when you get hit and thrown by a wave the size and the strength that we did, it really does end up doing some serious damage. As powerful and strong as the West Sail 32 is, a wave like that, it's going to flex the hull and kind of twist it and all that sort of stuff. So when I left Maine, where do you think you were heading? Towards the Azores? Well, essentially, I knew because I was leaving so late in the season, November 14th, that I was probably going to have to try and get my way south across the Gulf Stream and kind of on the low edge or the southern edge of the low pressure systems that come off the coast at Cape Hatteras and then typically head to the northeast. And these are weather patterns that I've dealt with. I crossed the Atlantic one time on a delivery in February, so it's sort of, it's not common, but I know I knew what to expect, and essentially, yeah, the plan was to get south and then head due east over towards the Azores, pick up the Portuguese trades down to the equator, and then cross the equator into the South Atlantic, circumnavigate the South Atlantic, and then return back. And essentially, my idea was to have kind of a nice trade winds, tropical weather sort of sailing experience. I wanted to be out there and I wanted to be able to read books and I wanted to kind of relax and just enjoy being in out on the sea. I mean, I love being out there. It's absolutely it's wonderful. And even throughout this whole experience, hey Bess, hey Billy, good to see you. Even throughout this experience, when I look at some of the videos and stuff that I took, I'm talking about how all these issues are happening, all the problems, the broken things, and also, how rough it is or anything like that. But right before the video ends, I'm almost always just taking a look around the horizon and I'm saying, boy, it sure is beautiful out here, though. I'll tell you. And it's one of those things. Oh, thanks, Sail Alibi. Appreciate it. It's really one of those things where I don't know. I was expecting something that I suppose I shouldn't have expected. In that it would just be sort of a nice gentle cruise. I'd escape some heavy weather up north. I knew I was going to deal with a little bit of it, but I didn't. I didn't expect to just get hammered over and over and over again with very little in between. Will you spray skirts again? Spray skirts. Yeah, I was actually looking at that with a friend of mine tonight because the West Sail family has really sort of come together and we might be able to get some new gallows stanchions for the boat pretty much donated, which would be fantastic. And so this stuff's obviously all pretty expensive and I worked most of the summer to upgrade a lot of these things and now they lay somewhere in between Bermuda and Cape Cod at this point, but um, the spray skirts are so old, I never would have thought they would have held up against a wave like that. And it did give me pause that, okay, that's a big bit of surface area. A wave hits it, or the boat gets turned over and pushed into the sea. It's a big bit of surface area for, a lot of pressure. And I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to definitely use spray skirts again, but I am going to cut an X pattern in them and put Velcro on that so that if I were to get hit by a big wave, it would just blow the spray skirt open. The wave could cut right through, and then we'd be good. Because again, these sort of conditions and those sort of waves are pretty rare. It's, one of the first times I've seen vicious, violent waves like that in my life. And I think, I'm sure we'll get into it later, but I think one of the things that really comes into play is that I was wrong place at the wrong time. And that means Gulf Stream, a gale, and just those sort of circumstances. Your approximate location when you decided to head to Beaufort and how many miles you were from there and how long it took you to get there. Well, Don, that was kind of interesting. So the knockdown happens on the 20th of November at about 11:30 at night. I was approximately 200 something miles away from Bermuda to the northeast. And my first thought was, I need solar. I need to get the AIS running again. So let's go ahead and let's just get to Bermuda and I can probably get the parts I need and then I can be off again. And one of the problems is that the next low pressure system sort of built up and it actually strengthened. And then it also moved south a little bit. And I was very fortunate to have a good friend of mine here in Beaufort, Scott, who alerted me to sort of the change because I'm downloading the weather typically every day or two. Usually I would only do it every 3 days. But in these sort of circumstances, I sort of up the ante, but he had alerted me to it. So I downloaded the weather and then essentially, sorry, my brain doesn't work 100% right now. Essentially, I saw that and I said, okay, no, I'm not going to be able to make it to Bermuda. I'm not going to beat that storm. So I went due south, and my plan was to then circle back and head north to Bermuda. And then that big cold front started coming down, and I knew I wasn't going to be able to beat through that to get to Bermuda. And so it was at that point, probably around the 25th or 26th of November. And I was probably about 400 miles to the southeast of Bermuda when I decided, you know what? I have extensive enough repairs to do to this boat and I don't have a lot of money and I just really want to get back to the States where I know good marinas, good places, and good people that I can sort of come back to and just be all park the boat. And I know I'm safe, I'm sound. I don't need a dinghy, I don't need any of that sort of stuff. So it was pretty much after the second attempt or thought of getting up to Bermuda was a no-go because of the weather that I decided, South Carolina is a really good spot to get to. So that was where I went. I was watching the lows just roll off the East Coast. Thought you might be getting crap beat out of you. Yeah, right now the North Atlantic is literally on fire. It's been that way for the last month. It's I don't want to say it's unprecedented by any means because November in the North Atlantic, December in the North Atlantic, and then January are no joke. It's low pressure system after low pressure system, but the stuff that's just coming off is absolutely crazy. I'm so glad that I am not out there. I know that had this not happened and I was able to continue on my way, I'd be in the doldrums or possibly even nearing or cross the equator at this point. So I'd be well away from all this stuff. But still, the thought of trying to do like a turnaround and get out of here right now, it's just like no way. Because a lot of these low pressure systems are sinking really far down low. The jet stream is what pushes those down. Thomas Murphy, good to see you, bud. Greetings from Rockland, Maine. The legendary Oracle is in the house. If you haven't listened to the podcast I just put up on YouTube, it was a little throwback for our summer wrap up. Murph is an absolute legend. Mike DeSimon, hey, one of my biggest supporters. Do you think leaving earlier from the North would plan next time, or would that not matter? No, it definitely would matter. The latest I had ever left Maine was November 1st. And typically I leave around there at the end of October, end of the hurricane season sort of thing. And I've typically gotten my butt kicked for a number of days. There was one year where I headed out and 5 days later I was hove to in a gale force winds for 3 days, waiting it out. And I was headed to Charleston and I ended up again east of Bermuda and then had to come on back. But that was the only bout of bad weather I saw that year. So it's one of those things where the longer you wait, the shorter the weather windows get in between these things. And you know, I wanted to help the team out up there in the boatyard. We also had that storm, the name storm Nicole. When that came up, it was really, I didn't want to head out into the Atlantic with Noah focusing on this storm that might build up. And then essentially when it turned into a name storm, I mean, you know, you go out in those conditions and then you have to get rescued off your boat. People are like, what are you, an idiot? Why would you go out there in that? And you know, I may have sailed around the world, but I'm not I don't have a death wish. I don't want to go out there and just get pummeled. It really is one of those things where with this trip I had sort of just run out of time, and I knew that if I waited any longer I was essentially going to lose any weather window at all. And if I was going to make it south, it was going to be in tiny little hops along the coast. And maybe that would have been a better thing to do, but I'm not too sure. How long were you planning to take for the original route you were planning to do? The Atlantic 8, I was figuring on 4 months, maybe 5 months, depending. And that may have included some stops in places like St. Helena, Ascension Island, the Cape Verdes. You know, it was sort of a very loose plan as far as where I would sail and how long I would be out for, but I really essentially just wanted to do I wanted to reach sort of my ocean zen mode, which usually takes about a month or so, and then just be able to kind of live in that for an extended period. Maybe too soon, but have you been documenting the details while they were fresh in your future writing? Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, luckily I have a lot of really good footage of everything. I mean, even when the knockdown happened, I had to go up and I had to cut away all the solar and all the gallows that were dragging behind the boat and knocking into the rudder and the hull. And once those were cut away, I had to come back down below and start, you know, dealing with all the chaos that was around. And for some reason I had my GoPro in my pocket, and so I whipped it out and I started filming, and I would do little 1 minute uploads just to sort of see like this is chaos down here and this is what I'm doing. And then I would go up and I was bilging and I took a little video of that as well. And so yeah, I mean I documented all of it in the logbook and also in my journal, but then I have all the video stuff as well, which I'm really thankful for. You know, I it's nice because when you do finally get back to land, and you get to look back on all of it, it definitely helps because I think this sort of adventure with sort of the disaster aspect of it is really good for you know, presentations and things like that. I'm pretty sure I can build a pretty enthralling story around it, especially with all the footage. Mike Hurley here, since you will have to do over the solar panels, would you think about doing battery type switch? Like switch the batteries as in go for like lithium ion or something? I'm not sure what you mean on that one. When you get a chance, maybe post a list of the parts needed. I have leftovers. I appreciate that, Rob. Yeah, I think right now we're looking actually pretty good. The gallows are the big part, you know, and like I said, the West Sail family out on the West Coast has kind of pulled together to find some of those, and the rest of the stuff is pretty much solar panels and you know, AIS aerials and things like that. But you know, we're working on trying to get those, and I've already been able to find day work down here. You know, you mentioned in a marina that you're looking for some hours, and people come out of the woodwork. I've already been up somebody's mast and have to go up another one tomorrow and all that sort of stuff. So that's kind of nice to be able to get a few hours in, because I need enough time to be able to continue doing the editing and the podcast, but at the same time, yeah, obviously Sparrow needs parts, so I'll let you know on that one, Rob. Glad you're still here. Thanks, Jay Diz. Yeah, I'm glad I'm here too. This was more than any other trip I think I've ever been on. This was one that there was a good amount of time where things were a little questionable. It wasn't really until the next day when I started to see the conditions that I was actually in. And the type of waves is what it really came down to. I've sailed in really large swell, um, upwards of like 40-foot swell in the Southern Ocean. But these are just rolling hillsides. They're gentle, so to speak. They're impressive to see, um, but it's when they start breaking and rolling down the front of themselves as if they're coming up to a shoreline. That's when things just get out of hand. And again, it's a case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, the Gulf Stream in a gale, and getting into the eddies, and just having things just get out of control, essentially. I mean, for the entire day, as the winds came on at like 4 in the morning on the 20th, and that entire day, Sparrow and I were just screaming downwind. We were loving it. I mean, Sparrow loves to sail straight downwind, triple reef Maine, 30 knots of wind, and just surfing, surfing, surfing. The waves never built up very high because they didn't have a chance to. We were in a current flowing to the east. The wind was coming from the west and going to the east, and there were huge rain squalls that kept just pounding down the waves. And it just somewhere along the line it changed, and that big wave came and got me. Did you have a conversation about best tool for cutting loose lines? Somebody said a grinder, thank God, a buck for a buck knife. Yeah. Well, I had spoken with a professional rigger up in Maine on the podcast, a guy by the name of Larique. And I was always under the impression that a big pair of sharp bolt cutters was going to be pretty sufficient, but he said absolutely not. He said if you ever try it, you're gonna see that all you're gonna do is smush the wire. You're not gonna cut it. And he said you need really these hydraulic cutters that, as you just keep squeezing and squeezing and building up the hydraulics, it just pinches and pinches and it'll snap it. Either that or a cordless grinder, so that you can, with a cutting wheel, so you can just go up and bing, bing, bing. But yeah, luckily, all I had to get through was electrical wire, some line, a bunch of spectra. I was fortunate, and somehow the last thing that was hanging on was one of the old wire lifelines, but it had one of those pelican clips, and somehow I was able to hold the tension back and open that pelican clip. Normally on this boat, those things, I never use them, so they're not exercised, and that would have been stuck on there pretty good. But there were a lot of things that happened that night that were very coincidental. Things like having the GoPro in my pocket. Never would have done that. Never do that ever. I always have a place for it. The buck knife that my uncle Jerome gave me after I made it around the world was in my pocket. And this is a knife it's a nice knife, and I never have that in my pocket ever. And it's just one of those things where these things sort of happened coincidentally, I guess, but call it what you want. But it was one of those things where it made it so that instantly I could make these sort of decisions and carry out these actions to sort of help ensure the safety. Tell us West Sail 32, Hull 522. The West Sail community is rooting for you. I know. I feel the love. I really do. I got to talk to Mike Poor, and he was already in touch with Bud, and I guess everybody was sort of watching and seeing and stuff. And I don't know, he made the comment that it's nice to have me out there because they get to sort of live a little vicariously through me, and I'm more than happy to be the guy on the end out there for sure. But every once in a while, I'm gonna get punched down, and I'm gonna need some help. You got your sweater on, yes, and you know what? So my mom made this sweater for me. I've had it forever. Took it around the world. It's got oil stains and all sorts on it. It used to be white. Now it's kind of an off-white, but this was on the floor covered in spaghetti sauce when the knockdown happened and egg yolks and all that other stuff. But one trip through the washing machine, and I was like, oh, my mom's wish is going to be granted. She hates it that I wear this thing because it's so dirty looking, but nope, it's still hanging in. Which bulkhead's cracked would be easy to get at. Right now, the main area where that have cracked free are the bulkheads in between the engine room and the cabin. So all along by the nav station back there, and then by the galley over here, it's basically there's fiberglass that runs from the hull up a few inches onto the bulkhead, and all that has cracked free, and you can see a pretty sizable gap. And actually, if I grab hold of the starboard side, which is the side that got thrown into the water, I can actually push on that whole bulkhead, which is definitely not good. So I really need to get in there, get some fiberglass on it, take a look. I don't think there's any rotted wood. I think it was just the absolute shock of getting sort of thrown into the sea, because that was sort of the interesting thing is that all the damage that was really done, or the majority of the damage was all done not on the side that got thrown into the water, which is why I sort of think that we didn't actually get hit by a breaking wave. I believe that the wave started to break underneath us. It lifted us up. We tipped over, and then we rode the falls down all the way until we hit the bottom of the wave and smacked into it. And, I was half asleep down below, but the minute we started to move in an unnatural state, I was awake, and then within about a second or two, I was being covered with everything from books to the cushions to the table that I'm sitting at here. Very luckily, there was a spare starter motor that somehow got out of a hole that's I don't even know how it got out of this cabinet, because it was so locked in there, and it ended up underneath where my head was. And I don't know if that's what hit me in the head. There's a video where it really does look like I got a black eye, and my ear hurt for about 10 days or so after this. And I was definitely super confused the next morning. I couldn't add up. I was trying to measure the distances on the chart, and I could not do the math between how many minutes are in a degree and how big the measurement I was taking. Luckily, that's all subsided, but it was one of those things where I do feel like I was a bit concussed out there for sure. I'm glad you made it back safe. I look forward to the video clips. This current adventure, very humbling. Yes, when I started looking at some of the video, the day I got back, I had to actually stop. I couldn't. I was like grinding my teeth. I was all tensed up, and I had to really just put that stuff away for a little while, try and get some sleep, and then sort of move on. But I've looked at pretty much all of it at this point, and wow, there's a few of them where I'm like, geez, that looks a little out of hand there. I wouldn't want to be on that, or that looks like super sloppy. You make a wish list and let us know how to throw some support. Yeah, I'll definitely I'll try to I'll try to figure something out as far as a wish list and everything goes. Excuse me. It's hard because I definitely love to have all the support and everything. It's just one of those things where it's very hard for me to just say like, I need all this stuff. Who's gonna get it for me? It's never been my style. I had some people say I should do like a GoFundMe or something, but I think when it's in my power to be able to earn the money that I need to be able to replace a bunch of this stuff, I always try and go that way, but I definitely appreciate the support. And this is definitely a time where that bill is going to be pretty big. So I will figure that out. Do you prefer running downwind in those conditions with triple reef main versus head sail? Yeah, on this boat. So if when I'm in heavy weather and I'm running with it, one of the problems with using a headsail instead of the mainsail on this boat is that if I want to keep, say, a staysail full, then I have to actually be at quite a severe angle to the wind, or else it'll just collapse and then it'll fill up and bang, and there's a lot of shock load. Now you can use a spinnaker pole or a whisker pole to pull it out. The only problem with that is then you're dealing with a lot of work up there on the foredeck. And in these conditions, I like to try and stay aft in the cockpit if I can, or at least not go much further than the mast. And I think because of the hull shape on Mighty Sparrow with the very long, very deep keel, that allows me to be able to just use that triple reef mainsail, and we track really, really well. There's not a whole lot of rounding up. Mongo doesn't seem to get overpowered. And I mean, I'm sheeted that main out all the way. So we're pressed up against the shrouds, up against the spreaders, but there's not a lot of motion. There's not a lot of movement if you're sheeted out that far. And the sails, even though they're the same sails that I use to go around the world, are so strong. They're so overbuilt. Anywhere where there was wear through the stitches or on the battens, I've put chafing tape on there, which AKA is Gorilla tape, which works great. And that has made it so that they don't really chafe through, and they seem to be able to manage that sort of rubbing and all that pretty well. But like I said, I mean, when they're sheeted out that far, they're just plastered up against that stuff, against the wires. And yeah, I mean, Sparrow does really well when the winds get up into the 40 to 50 knot range. That's when I sort of switch, depending on what the sea state is, to a storm jib sheeted hard amidship. So it's just sheeted right in the center. I take the mainsail down, and essentially at that point, I'm almost down to just bare poles. But again, it depends on the sea state, because if the waves are breaking and they're kind of big, I need a little bit more power in the rig to be able to keep surfing them and keep escaping sort of that breaker, the breaking wave part of it. Because when we get pooped on this boat, I mean, it fills that cockpit up and it hits the washboards and the companionway and it sprays into the boat. I've had that happen quite a few times, and it's not fun. Like, it makes down below pretty miserable. But I'll tell you, when you get knocked down, so much salt water comes out of the toilet, out of the sinks, through the hatch boards. The whole place was soaked and it was covered with food, that it was kind of weird, because the next two gales that I went through, I didn't really care. I'd be sticking my head out of the companionway and it'd be raining and it'd be getting down below, and I was just like, whatever, it's a mess down there anyway. Maybe a little rainwater will kind of clean it up a little bit. Let's see. Your bank safe. Can you make it? When do you think you will have Sparrow back 100%? I'm hoping, if all goes well, I think by about mid-January, I may be able to have this boat ready. And believe it or not, I've already sort of got it in my head a little bit that we could continue on this voyage. We could set sail towards the end of January, stay just below where the lows are, in between sort of the low pressure systems and the variables and the trade winds, and try and make our way out across the Atlantic towards Africa, and then get far enough east to head south and go across the equator. Now, I'm I'm in no sort of state at this point still, having only been back for a little while, to make any sort of call like that. But regardless, I definitely want to get Sparrow obviously back 100%, in sort of fighting shape, so to speak. And yeah, I'm going to go visit my parents. My mom definitely was a bit shaken up by this one. And so I'm going to go visit them this next week, and then I'll be back at the end of December, and hopefully we'll be just going full till on trying to fix everything. And I've got a buddy of mine in town who's got a nice long piece of teak that we can replace all the missing parts on the cap rail. And the thing is I don't want to just replace everything. I want to try and improve upon what was there. I don't know if through bolting and upping the size of everything would make a difference if we were hit by that same type of wave and twisted and turned over. But whenever stuff breaks, you always want to try and make it a little bit stronger. So that's sort of the goal. Mongo is incredible to survive all that. How did he get his name? It's Mongo. He's named after the guy from Blazing Saddles, the big strong dumb guy. Because Mongo sits on the back of this boat, big, strong, and dumb, all through every single gale. I can't believe that the wind blade didn't snap. I mean, that's just a little thin piece of wood. And that was honestly, before I even looked at the mast, the first thing I shined my flashlight on was Mongo. Because, well, obviously, I mean, if Mongo's not there anymore, then I'm steering. So that means a lot to me. But Mongo was just right there. He was a little bit clipped because with Mongo, you have two control lines, and they go through pulleys on either side, and that pulley was mounted onto the cap rail, and so that all got ripped off, and so Mongo was sort of like one armed, just trying to keep steering, and I was able to just do a quick little lashing and get it tied off. But I mean, that wind vane has sailed with me close to like 70,000 miles, and I have only ever had to take over. Oh my gosh, just a couple of times. And it wasn't really having to take over. It was more just, the winds were just too darn high for Mongo to be able to kind of just counteract fast enough. I mean, it's really just an amazing, amazing piece of equipment. And I'm still pretty puzzled as to know why Peter Lawless's or Pat Lawless's Aries failed. I haven't gone right back into the Golden Globe race yet to really see what's going on, but I know that he had trouble with his Aries, so he had to retire. But I don't know. I mean, it's just such a like a bulletproof, simple sort of thing. Let's see. How much water did you take down below after the knockdown? I would guess somewhere between like 20 and 50 gallons, something like that. Probably more like 20. I did end up. I had a 40-gallon water bladder underneath the bunk that ripped from its mounts, obviously because it's pretty heavy, and that was sloshing around on the floor. So I took that pretty much immediately over to where the bilge opens up, and I just slashed that open because I just didn't want a huge bag, a big, huge, heavy bag, floating around in the boat. And I went up, and it took me maybe 10 minutes or so to bilge the whole boat out with the manual pump, which pumps pretty fast. So I couldn't tell you exactly, but I estimate it's probably around 20 gallons or so. I mean, the boat was pretty much soaked down below. Pillows, blankets, anything that hit the floor was absolutely soaked. But we did get very lucky. These portholes up here, the one by the nav station, about 2 inches away from it, there's a big dent in the wall there, and so something pretty substantial smacked right into it, just inches away. And had the porthole gotten shattered, I do have little inserts I can put in there, but that would have been pretty bad. It would have just been another element of something else I would have to deal with right at that moment. Cut the stuff away, pack all the holes closed. Meanwhile, everything outside is still sort of raging, but luckily this was a case of really just an oddball wave coming out of a very different direction than the rest of them. Because for the rest of that night, I mean, we took a couple of hits, but nothing like that. Nothing in that size or ferocity, if that's even a word, in that sort of range. Let's see. You mentioned triple reefing. What reefing setup do you have? The purposing for me is bad. Porpoising, yeah. would like to know if you have any workable reefing system from the cockpit. No, I don't. My reefing is all done up by the mast. I have it's essentially I have the bull horns, so to speak. I have a big hook right at the gooseneck, and there's rings on the sail, and so I lower that down. I hook the ring on, and then I tighten up the halyard, and then I have little winches on the boom, and I have three different reefing lines, and I crank those suckers in, and then I have to manually sort of tie up the slack. And it's sort of an older version or an old school way of doing it, but it's always worked pretty well for me. I think because I've done it so much and I can do it rather quickly, but I don't have much issue reefing, even heading almost straight downwind. Again, the sails seem to hold up to the beating that I put on them for sure. But yeah, it's very standard because I've always felt that when you run a lot of that stuff all back to the cockpit, it's destined for little troubles here and there because then your system is far more complicated. And I could be way wrong. I mean, this is just my own opinion, but the simpler the system, the less little problems you might have. I mean, every once in a while, I run into a slack piece of the sail when I'm trying to reef gets jammed up in between the reefing line and the block that it's going through, and then I have to sort of wiggle that free. That's about the only little snafu or snag that ever sort of really happens. So I always try and keep it really, really simple. How do you get a triple reefed Maine down in 40 knots running downwind? Can you walk us through that move? Yeah, well, I'll tell you what. Uh, Hitting it down is not all that hard because as soon as you release that halyard, you're sort of clawing it all down, and then I try and wrap it up with the line. But it's when you have to put that sucker back up in 40 plus knot winds. I've had to do that once, and that took nearly an hour because I was inching it up. This was in the Southern Ocean in the March gale, way deep into the Pacific, and the boat had just slowed down too much as the wind dropped off, and that was an absolute nightmare. But no, essentially, you're up there by the mast. The triple reefed mainsail, you got to remember, is very, very small. I mean, it just goes past the spreader. So we're talking the size of like a laser mainsail, if not smaller. And so it's not a lot of sail area. And as soon as you ease that halyard, you start just clawing it down a little bit at a time, a little bit at a time. And it'll be a bit messy for a little bit, but once you get all that sail out of there, it's still on the track. You're just grabbing. I typically grab a decent like 20-30 foot piece of line that's already there. I cleat it off right there on the mast, and then I do kind of a daisy chain or a chain stitch right around all the slack, and then sheet that sucker in or put it however I want. Sometimes I'll leave the boom well sheeted out so that at least there's still a little bit of pressure, almost like a miniature sail. But more often than not, I'm pulling it almost a midship. Um, but yeah, it's one of those things. Again, when you've done it a few times and when you're up there and you're used to it, it actually bringing sails down is typically pretty fast. It's when you gotta start putting them back up that it gets a little tricky. That one's always a pain. Mongo, yep, great movie. GGR Mighty Sparrow. Yeah, I don't know, Brian. That one, it's a whole different ball game from what I try and do out at sea. The old racing thing. I don't know. I've never seen a huge amount of point in trying to go as fast as possible, unless you're trying to outrun something, I suppose. So get ready for the next GR. Yeah, I don't know. What type of manual pump do you have? I'm not too sure about that. As far as the manual bilge pump, and the reason I was using that instead of the automatic one was just that I turned the battery switch off uh, just as soon as I remembered to, because I didn't really have a chance to look in the engine room for a while amidst all the chaos. But I knew that I wanted to make sure power was off, not going to have some weird arcing short or anything like that. And so I just went up with the handle, and it's, just the standard one. Almost every boat has one where you stick the little handle in, and just once you get that primed, it is shooting water out of that bilge. I mean, it was really it's phenomenal. My buddy Pax yesterday was testing out his, because he had said he'd never used it, and so they flooded their bilge, and he said it was amazing how fast it emptied it out. Let's see. My Aries, 40 years old, started to not hold course well. Totally disassembled, clean lube, back it up. They are in amazing pieces and bulletproof equipment. Yeah, because there really aren't that many pieces to it. And I had to I contacted the company at one point, because I had one pin that sort of slid out, and I lost a bunch of the bearings and all that sort of stuff on the trip, and they sent me a whole box of spare bushings and bearings and all this sort of stuff, springs and everything. They didn't even charge me for it. They just sent it to me. Really an amazing company. I'm really glad they still make them. I had the old one, which I almost lost in the Caribbean a long time ago. It was all corroded, not the actual Aries, but the arms that were going into it. But yeah, it's such a perfect design for a West Sail 32. The way it mounts on the boomkin and all that sort of stuff. I am always in awe of watching that thing, watching Mongo sail and surf waves just over and over again, and never, like, the fact that it doesn't jibe this boat is remarkable. And we get close every once in a while, but it's really just, I mean, thousands of miles of downwinding. And I think Mongo has only truly accidentally jibed twice. The other two times was because of a line that got hooked on its hydro blade. Like, there's a little handle on it, and that was it. Everything else, like, it's an absolute amazing piece of equipment. Whaler pump? I'm not sure. It might be. I have no idea. I'd have to take a look and see what it is. But it's one of those big sort of diaphragm ones. Matt Rutherford recently experienced Starlink out at sea. It's weird. Yeah, he and I talked the other day. That's exactly right. It ruins the solar of the solo thing. When you know that you could basically essentially turn a Wi-Fi hotspot on, and turn on Netflix or YouTube or any of that sort of stuff. I don't know. For me personally, that just I don't know. I wouldn't want that on my boat. I can see the benefits of having it, especially if you're trying to share the experience of a trip with sort of the world. Being able to live stream out in the middle of the ocean would be pretty cool, and be able to upload videos and things like that. But I don't know. Me personally, when I go out to sea, I'm looking to essentially just take a break from all of that stuff. I want low level input. I want the sea, I want clouds, I want the stars, I want the sun, and basically I want to work with the wind. And that is it. And I want the most intense thing that I do to be reading like a Jack Reacher novel and be like, wow, this is intense. That's the intensity level I'm looking for. Outside of maybe surfing waves at 15 knots in a West Sail 32. But yeah, the objective is to take a break from the modern day chaos, at least for me. So I don't know, and that's what I was looking for on this trip, and I don't know, it ended up being a completely different sort of experience. But I was talking with a friend of mine the other day, and I do think that this experience, as sort of scary as it was, and all that, I think it's definitely a good thing. I think it was a good thing for me to go through. I think in some ways, maybe it's something I've been searching for, is to see weather like that that's completely out of control and completely out of my hands, on whether or not we're going to make it through the next 20 minutes or the next 12 hours. That second day of that gale, when I was trying to get out of the eddies that were surrounding me, and these large sets were coming in of these big 20 to 25-foot swell, topped off with a big breaking wave that then proceeded to would just tumble down the front of this thing for like 10, 15 seconds. I mean, it was remarkable. It was stuff I've never seen before. And there was just this corridor that I was in. And for about 3 hours, that was it. Like I was just there sailing downwind, trying to get away from this area, watching these monsters sort of come from two different angles, sometimes overlap each other. And it was just completely out of my hands. And it was the first time in my life where I've ever actually taken the grab bag, which is right back there, and put it down below the companionway stairs. It's got the EPIRB in it. Threw a couple of gallons of water next to it. I had my knife obviously still on me to cut away the life raft. And I was sort of thinking in my head, like, okay, what are the steps I'm going to take? If we get rolled, dismasted, and it punches a hole in the hull, like, what do we need to do? All right, we're going to grab this, we're going to deploy that, and then we are gone. And it's really one of the first times that I sat and had a lot of time to think about that. The Southern Ocean is definitely a whole different ball game because you are so far away, you're so isolated. You have to get into a life raft. That doesn't mean anything as far as your survival. But in the North Atlantic, a few hundred miles away from Bermuda, you end up having to abandon ship. If you make it into your life raft, you've got a pretty good chance of actually still surviving and such. But it's still, I mean, it's not like that's going to be easy. It's not guaranteed that you get rolled and the mast comes down and the boat starts sinking. It's not guaranteed that you're going to be able to make the steps to go. But I'm not trying to get all dark or anything like that. I'm just thinking back to sort of the condition I was in, and as you see these big sets rolling in, just it was it was it was something. I mean, it's burned into my memory. All right, switching subjects here. Pat did a video for the GGR explaining what went wrong. Oh, okay. A bushing he didn't either service or replace that broke. Okay. Well, I'll have to check that out because it'll be interesting. I mean, he has an Aries, I have an Aries. I'd like to know because hey, I'd like to get a spare one if I don't have it already. What was the top wind speed you saw and top sustained winds? Oh, definitely gusting up into the 40s during the squalls you're in say like 30 knots of wind sustained. So that's a near gale, and then you get a massive squall that comes in. That's when the wind really starts to howl. And man, I don't have an anemometer on the boat, but through my own experience and stuff, I would say we definitely saw gusts up into the probably 40 to 45 knot range, which thankfully are very short lived because they're just gusts. It's really the sustained winds that really make the big difference and do the damage and build up the waves. But I would say during the night on the third gale, so we had a near gale when we left, like 2 days out in the Gulf of Maine, and that was like a really tight, small, low pressure system. That one got up to near gale status, so 29, 30 knots. Then we went through another one just outside of there, and that one was a near gale as well. Again, 29 to 30 knots. The third one, the one that the knockdown happened in, that was probably sustained, probably 35 maybe for a good portion of it. And that one hit us like a wall. It was crazy. It's like 4 in the morning. I'm sort of waiting for this thing because I know it's scheduled. I'm being able to download the weather so precisely and so often. And this big squall comes in. It goes from being almost flat, no wind, to just this big rain squall, and it's blowing like crazy. And I'm sort of like, holy cow, wow, this is really starting with the fury. And then the rain squall stops, but I can hear just breaking waves and wind way off in the distance. And I'm just listening. I'm like, "Oh, holy cow." And it's just getting louder and louder and louder. And there where I wasn't feeling anything. And then boom, all of a sudden it was probably blowing 20, 25, just instantly going from 0 to that. And that was the beginning. So it started at about 4 in the morning, and it just kind of consistently built and built and built and built. And again, as I was running sort of alongside and with the Gulf Stream, it really didn't build the waves up all that big. But when those gusts would come through and the squalls would come through, man, it was exciting. Holy smokes. And I spent a lot of my time up on deck during that day, just because it was nice. It was warm out. I was making my way east, which I had to do anyway. Ideally I would have just gone further south, but you know, I I was pretty stupid, when it comes down to it. I probably, looking back on it, hindsight's 2020. I should have tried to get the hell out of there as fast as I could. I should have done whatever I could to stay away from any of those eddies. My thinking did not include the fact that north of me or west of me, there were eddies that this wind, which it was a big system, this wind was going through and building these waves up. And eventually these waves are going to find me or come close to me. And that's something I just didn't take into account. I was like, you know what? We're just going to rip, we're going to get to this point, we're going to jibe, and then we're going to get out of here. And you know the best laid plans sometimes fall apart. So I think if I were to have sort of a takeaway from my experience out there, it would just be that you don't mess around with the Gulf Stream. You just don't. And the Gulf Stream doesn't mean that 60-mile wide mainstream. It means the big eddies that have 2 to 3 knot currents doing circles out there. Those are just about as dangerous, if not worse, because they're moving around, they're wiggling a lot more than that Gulf Stream is. So it is. That's something I definitely would never. I'll never be able to approach the Gulf Stream the same way as I did that time, and I normally never would. I mean, I've always feared it. I rarely ever try to take advantage and ride it unless the conditions are absolutely perfect. So it really is. It just reaffirmed sort of that idea that it's not a place to be tangled with. It creates its own weather systems, and it really is. It's a dangerous, dangerous place. As beautiful as it can be, it's a dangerous place. Were you running downwind when the knockdown happened? Yeah. So the winds were coming pretty much out of the east, southeast, I believe. But primarily they were just coming, or no, sorry, the west southwest. So they were pretty much just coming right out of the west. And this wave hit me almost directly from the north, as far as I could tell. I mean, I know it hit me on the port side. I was running straight downwind. The mainsail was on the starboard side, so that all got dunked straight into the water. But essentially, yeah, like I said, it basically hit us just so perfectly timed that it picked up Sparrow, which weighs 13 or 15 tons. No, I think it's 13 tons we weigh. Picked up 13 tons of boat, and then we just tip over, and then we rode the breaker down right into the sea, and then just smash right into it. Yeah, it was so crazy. And I mean, I was fully geared up. I had all of my wet weather gear on. I still had my headlamp on, and I had my life jacket. I had my lifeline. I was just trying to get a little bit of sleep, because I knew it was going to be a long night. And then instantly I'm just covered, absolutely piled and stuff. It's just absolutely amazing. But then after all that, oh, do you have a good idea of where the eddies were when you were running east? I did. My forecast was a little bit old, maybe like 18 hours or something like that. And so, I was using a new program, rather than the old stuff. So in the past, I would have never even had any idea where the Gulf Stream is. I usually relied on my younger brother, who would sort of set up gates for me and tell me, okay, head for this waypoint, and then you're clear there. this time I was able to download updated forecasts, and I think they update them every 24 hours. And so I could see the Gulf Stream and where it was. But I do know that when I did update that later and I looked back at my track, the eddy that I was skirting had expanded and also strengthened quite a bit, which makes a lot of sense as far as, why some of these waves heaped up as big as they actually did. So it was, I don't know, in some ways I question whether or not it's a really good thing to have all that technology that's sort of claiming its precision in some respect. I mean, when I download a forecast, I believe it for about 3 days. Anything past that, and I'm sort of like, well, maybe that's giving us a little idea of the overall picture. Um, but for the first time, I was sort of, playing the guy that's sort of like, okay, if I can just get right there, there's my gap, and I'm gonna jibe there, and I'm gonna just, and I don't know. I mean, if that model isn't correct, if for whatever reason the information is getting fed to that satellite or from that buoy isn't spot on, I might just be wandering right into the wrong situation. And if I didn't have that information, if I didn't have that weather downloaded that early, then maybe I'm a bit more cautious and a bit less cavalier in thinking like, oh, I can worm my way around all this sort of stuff. And so I think there is a bit of a risk there when it comes to that technology. Like, you sort of think you know a whole lot more. You think it's you can outwit the thing, but it's the ocean, and the ocean does what the ocean's going to do and doesn't even know you're there, doesn't even care. And so I don't know. I mean, I wonder what I would have done had I not had any Gulf Stream information, if that would have changed my approach to the whole situation. And I kind of have a feeling it probably would have, to be honest. And, I think that's probably another big sort of takeaway for me, a lesson learned is that, you know, you can't always trust that stuff. It's not gospel. You have to realize that it's not exact, and just because it says there's no current there doesn't mean there's no current there. You're doing a great. You're doing processing these things is what is needed. Thank you, Rob. Yeah, I mean it's I obviously have still never really stopped thinking about this. I'm hoping to do a podcast with some friends of mine, and we're just going to talk about them because not that I get sick of it, but obviously I'm reaching out to quite a few friends and family over the last few days that I've been here, and I've told this story, and I've relived it multiple times, probably like 20 times at this point. So it's not like I wanna move on from it, but at the same time, it's like, in some ways, I kinda have to keep reliving it a little bit, so I am hopefully that helps me process it. Do you always stow your life raft on deck, and what are your thoughts about stowing life raft down below until needed? That's a good question. I actually don't stow it, well, no, I mean, I guess it is on deck. I typically stow it in the cockpit footwell all the way aft. It's lashed so that pretty much you cut one line and it will come free. But if you don't cut it, it's not going anywhere. But it's very, very protected in that footwell. I mean, it's below sort of the deck level. And if it's nice weather and I'm just doing some cruising, I will lash it up amidships right on the deck where most people put their life rafts. I don't like to keep it up there because I know that, you get a big enough wave and it's just going to rip that thing right off. Plus, if ever it needs to be deployed, I would like to be doing the all the things that you have to do from the cockpit. I'd like to be unzipping the or not unzipping it, but untying it from its lashings and tying off the painter line and throwing it over. I'd like to be doing that from the cockpit and not from amidships during really bad weather and stuff. Ideally, my thought process is I get the grab bag, couple gallons of water, throw that in the cockpit footwell right next to the life raft, get the life raft ready, sling the other stuff on my shoulder, and get step up into that life raft as Sparrow is literally going under the water. That can't be overstated enough. You never step down into a life raft. You always step up into it because the world's greatest life raft is a sailboat. Absolutely. But well, all right, we're getting past an hour, and I'm starting to almost lose my voice a little bit. But I want to thank everybody that came out for this. This is again, I feel the love, I feel the support, big time, and it really does mean a lot to me. At this point, I'm still obviously a little bit like, what's going on and what am I going to do? And I'm trying not to get too bogged down by, like all my plans for the next bunch of months have changed. And that's going to affect not only the winter, but the summer and the fall and everything. But I'm hoping that throughout this whole thing, I'm going to be able to sort of create a really good story out of it and be able to share that with a lot of people and hopefully do it live through presentations and all that sort of stuff. And I'm going to be working on getting the next video. The next video is going to be basically all about the knockdown, and it's going to have all the clips and all that sort of cool stuff in it. So it might take a little while. If I don't get it finished before I leave, then it may be just at the end of the month, because when I'm down there with the family and stuff, I'm going to try and focus on being with them. Going through something like this is pretty good for putting everything in perspective, especially when it comes to friends and family and what's really important in life and everything. So uh, but yeah, so other cool stuff will be coming up. Thank you everybody for coming out, and yeah, I'll keep throwing a few little clips out here and there, maybe in the shorts or whatever. But look for the next sort of 10-minute long video about the actual knockdown. That should be coming up in the next couple of weeks. So everybody have a great night, have a great weekend, and if I don't talk to any of you or I don't see you on another live, which I hope to do some more, especially about the GGR, have a great holiday season. And hey, we'll see you next year. All right, I'm going to end the stream. Have a great night.